Welcome, everyone, to Conflicts of Interest. This is episode 25, and I am the co host of the show, Kyle Anslone. I'm joined by the other co host, Will Porter. Will, how's it going today?
Good, Kyle. How are you doing tonight?
Very good. This is a very special episode of Conflicts of Interest because for the first time we have a guest on, and very fitting, it's our good friend Joanne Leon. She has, for the past few years, hosted the Around the Empire podcast, which is must listening if you really want to understand Russiagate in Syria and what's going on generally in the Middle East and with the U.S. deep state. Joanne, welcome for the first time to Conflicts of Interest. How you doing today?
Good. Thanks for having me on, Kyle. Hi, Will. How you doing? And
Good.
congratulations on your new show. It's great.
Yeah, thanks so much. I really appreciate you having. You're our very first guest. So this is a milestone for conflicts of interest.
Wow. Thank you.
Yeah. And I mean, for people who haven't listened to my old show, Foreign Policy Focus, Joanne was a guest on a few dozen times. And along with, just being a big supporter of the show and not only through, her own work, because if I didn't listen to Around the Empire, I definitely would never put out as quality a podcast as I do. And I'm sure, Will agrees and listens to every episode. But, just supporting and promoting the show and having me and Will on your show a few times was huge, but all just being a good friend. And, me and Joanne are always talking, on like IMs or something like that. And I pretty much feel like Joanne is about the best informed person on current events that I ever talked to. Just so much research, and I'm sure she's going to share a lot of us that with us today. So, along with checking out and subscribing Conflicts of Interest, make sure you also check out and subscribe to all of Joanne's content. Around the Empire has a YouTube page. There's the Libsyn channel. Joanne, is there anywhere else you send people to listen to your show?
Well, you can always just go to aroundtheempire.com to find everything else. That's probably the easiest.
All right. So the first thing I wanted to ask, and the last episode of the show was a solo episode with me breaking down the debate. So I'm not going to put too much of my own debate analysis in today's episode and really let Joanne and then Will too share a little bit of that and just their thoughts on the election. But one of the things, that the three of us have talked about so much is Russiagate. And, we're now at the 2020 election. And, even from paying attention to Russiagate pretty much from the start, I'm kind of surprised how much this foreign influence topic is playing in the 2020 debates. And so, as we, have had now the third debate, which is, I suppose, will be the last chance for Biden and Trump to really confront each other on this, so-called election meddling issue and everything like that, Joanne. I was just wondering, maybe where you think we're like, who's gonna benefit from this in the election, and then I wasn't sure if you had any thoughts on maybe who generally won that exchange in the debate. And I know it's so hard to break those things down and to tell. That was one of the things I really struggled with on the show and breaking down the debate, is just doing it dispassionately, because in one sense I think Trump is making some good points, although he really doesn't make them. I just know what he's talking about, so I'm able to kind of, put together the collusion scandals and stuff. And also, I'm not quite sure who's Biden's trying to convince and who's Trump trying to convince of election meddling and stuff like that. So I'm interested to hear your take on this.
Well, I thought it was interesting that Biden, in defense of the information that has come out about his business dealings through his son and other embarrassing things that were found on a laptop, that, as far as I know, nobody in the Biden campaign has denied that any of these things are authentic. But he dragged up a very old, familiar excuse or defense, which is, he just blurted out that 50 former intelligence officers, including 5 former CIA directors, posted a letter saying that this whole thing about Hunter and the business dealings, bribes, maybe you could call it. I mean, they definitely seem like bribes. That, all of that is just Russian disinformation that has been injected into the 2020 election. And it just kind of reminded me of the January 2017 intelligence quote unquote assessment that has really fallen apart completely. But they're just try the same tactic over and over again. As to who is going to benefit from that, the media has done really an astounding job of suppressing this information, particularly social media. For instance, I tried to, if people are familiar with Twitter, you could tweet things out, but you can also send direct messages, private messages. And so I was attempting to talk to someone about that on Twitter on, I think it was early on, maybe like the 15th. And I included a New York Post link in the direct message. It's a personal message, not public. And it wouldn't send the DM. It gave me some kind of an error message. So I got a different link, which is a different way to get to that same content, but with a different link, and that one sent through. So I was sure that they were just killing certain URLs. And then Twitter themselves, I guess Jack Dorsey admitted that they were killing the URL to prevent people from getting to this New York Post article. Now, I think that it had a Streisand effect, which means when you try to cover something up, it becomes like a secret that more and more people try to find it. But I don't know. I think a lot of people say, assuming you can trust any media or polls, that most Americans' minds are made up already. I think that the people who are all in on Russiagate, who seem to be most of the Democratic establishment and some portion of their voters, they still buy into it. They might not buy into every detail, but they still think that there was Russian meddling in the 2016 election in Trump's favor. I think they probably buy that excuse for Biden. I would think. I'm not going to vote for either of them as of right now. That's my plan. So I don't really have any dog in this fight, really. But I think the Biden voters must be looking for sort of reasons to. I guess most of them are just saying, I'm just voting him because he's not Trump. But others who may feel slightly guilt about it, maybe they get some solace out of what Biden said and they'll believe him. Trump knocked it down and he hinted about this scandal sort of a few times in the debate, but he didn't really blurt out much about the details of it, or at least the more salacious details. So, but he did sort of say, "Oh, really? Are you going to do this Russia thing again? Russia hoax?" And I think that his base will respond to that. I think they're not going to believe a word about Joe Biden's excuses, not to mention the fact that there are documents and some facts out there too. So I don't know that it's going to move the needle very much because it may with some undecided voters. But also, the thing that puzzles me is apparently they've had this material for quite a while and they waited until now. But the Democrats very strategically pushed for early voting and mail in voting. So I don't know what the number is now, but I think at that time something like 45 million people had already voted. So I don't know if it's going to have much of an impact. People keep talking about continuing investigations like that are going to continue after the election. I don't know. I mean, if Biden gets elected, I think all this stuff gets buried along with Russiagate. And so, yeah, I think it will have a marginal impact.
Yeah, Will, I mean, same question to you, and I'll kind of just add that I think maybe a little bit of what Joanne was saying there. I had felt like I don't know if there's really a whole lot of undecided voters or anybody who watched that debate with like a chessboard in front of them, and then was like, oh, Trump, I like his immigration. Oh, but Joe Biden's better on on healthcare. And then they kind of broke it down that way or something like that. But rather it's a matter of unmotivated voters and somebody who, generally, supports Trump or generally votes Republican, versus, somebody who's a Democrat or who, generally likes Obama and so kind of likes Joe Biden. If, they're going to be motivated by something that happens in the debate or not to actually get out there and go vote and stuff. And I felt like, they're both men like probably didn't lose people. They probably didn't unmotivate people to vote for them. But overall, like nobody really probably made a huge dent in getting more voters to their side. And particularly on this corruption issue, because I felt like neither of them really leveled a charge that was in any kind of narrative or made sense to anybody that wasn't already deeply paying attention and either believed the Russiagate narrative or the, coup narrative.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of swaying anybody, I don't think the debate really is gonna. I don't think there's too many like fence sitters who just watched the debate and said, "Oh wow, like after that performance, like I'm really convinced of one of the other sides." It is interesting to see how this corruption stuff plays into it because it's not like the talking point that Biden is corrupt and his family is corrupt. That's not new, certainly. Like we've heard that before about. I mean, all throughout the Ukraine, that whole Ukraine Gate thing was related to Trump trying to look into Biden and his potential corruption in Ukraine. We are getting a lot more detail now with these emails and stuff. And it actually was kind of crazy to see. Like Trump actually was not the one who brought that up in the debate. I wasn't even sure if Trump was gonna like. I expected he would bring that up, but Biden was the one who actually rose the idea of Rudy Giuliani and stuff first. And I don't think he meant to. You can kind of tell he's like, ah, crap, like because he started saying something about Trump's buddy or his crony or something, and he says Rudy Giuliani. He's like, ah, crap. He's like, okay, fine, I will say it. And then like he just opened that can of worms, which I found kind of funny that Biden's the one who did that. But honestly, I don't think Trump pursued that very effectively during the debate at all. Like he could have picked up that like Hunter Biden's business associate or whatever, Bob Alinsky, like could have started saying how, hey, like we're starting to see some of the stuff seems to be corroborated. This is not, just Russian, is that Bob Alinsky guy, is he a Russian agent too? Was he sent by the Kremlin? Like Trump could have taken up all the, like I'm pretty sure that guy had come out by the third debate or I guess it was
I
the
believe
second.
he was Trump's
was
guest
there.
at the debate. Yeah.
That's right. Right. He was literally there. So yeah, like Trump didn't seem to, it would have been a little gimmicky, I guess, to have the guy stand up or something like, and he's here at the debate. But I just don't think Trump really went as hard as he could on that, on the corruption stuff. And I just don't know how like effective it's going to be. I feel like that would have been his opportunity to really like effectively marshal that on stage in front of the American people, make Biden answer to it, give him a, yes or no question. Are those emails real? And I think he kind of screwed that opportunity. And so now I just think like the Biden campaign will be able to limp its way to the election without really directly addressing this. I just don't see it being all that consequential on specifically the Hunter Biden allegations and the corruption stuff.
Yeah, so in a political sense, Will, I think I definitely agree with that. But Joanne, I was gonna actually move in and ask you this: if you think that for those of us who are really going to dig and look and see what these emails say, who the communications are between, and what it may prove as far as Obama's Ukraine policy and what potential role Joe Biden had in benefiting from the fact that he was essentially viceroy of Ukraine and bragged that he could get their country's essentially attorney general fired. I mean, if that were if somebody were forcing Trump to fire Bob Barr, you would think that they would be calling Trump. Well, they did Putin's puppet. The same thing with Jeff Sessions, right? And so, do you have a sense on how much proof of that we're going to get out of this? And not I guess necessarily if it matters to MSNBC and if Rachel Maddow is going to report on it and if it'll sway the election, but just the truth behind it, which what me and you and Will have been seeking for like 4 years now.
Well, it looks pretty solid to me that what Biden's task was through Hunter was to shut down, well, just to get rid of the prosecutor and to shut down the investigation on Burisma. There's been a lot of things out there that say, nah, there wasn't, that investigation was dormant. That wasn't true. The prosecutor had seized some property even, and there was a bit of a panic based on some emails that are now public. And they were also not happy with Hunter Biden. They're like, hey, we paid you and you didn't deliver. And that's when Joe Biden kicked into gear and went over and threatened them with $1 billion from IMF. and they were forced into that very day firing Shokin. So I think that is pretty solid. The business deals, um, they've got some direct witnesses. Like I guess they were anticipating. There's a lot in the emails about starting companies like with some funding from the Chinese CEFC, I think it's called, a Chinese oil company,
Yeah.
and breaking down the equity shares, among them. And Joe Biden, referred to as the big guy, is definitely in the list of people who are going to get a share in all of this. But Joe Biden's personal finances, anything he's ever reported, shows him to be the poorest senator in the Senate. So I don't know where that money was going. There's also an email from Hunter Biden. In fact, I think I've got some text. There's a Hunter to his family saying, like, I love all you guys. If I can just have a minute, I could actually find it. I could read it, but he's basically saying to his family that he has been paying everything for 30 years. So it appears that the scheme was that the money would come to Biden's two brothers, his sister, and Hunter Biden, maybe some others, that they would get the money, they'd do all the deals, and through their personal finances, they would pay for everybody else. It looks like that's how it was all set up. So I don't know if you're going to be able to, I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know if you're going to be able to say that these things, if there's anything that could be prosecuted, but it really looks very bad. It also looks bad, the amount of money that Biden has raked in since he has left office. I got some numbers from I believe this is a Larry Johnson article on the SST Pat Lang's website. So he says it's no coincidence that after the Biden Center opened in Washington, D.C. in February 2018, donations to the entity soared. 2017, a total of 7.7 million, 2018, 27 million, 2019, like 27 million again. A lot of these are anonymous. So the problem is that I think this is it sounds kind of like the Clinton Foundation. It's almost like, to me, it looks like Hunter was kind of like the Clinton Foundation.
Right.
Yeah, and what I don't know, unfortunate for Hunter Biden, I guess, but just terrible position for somebody with, his addiction issues to, be in, because it sounds like, from the stories we've heard about Hunter Biden, it's not just that, he has a drug problem. He seems to have like a real impulse control problem where,
Yeah.
He's spending loads of money on strippers and prostitutes and doing all kinds of crazy sexual stuff while getting high on several drugs. I mean, if you're in that position, you're just sitting on a pile of, kind of ill-gotten money. I imagine you just kind of go crazy with it and stuff like that. So maybe that's place where some of the money went. Although, as you said, Joe Biden's financial records showing him not to be extremely rich is something that I guess is worth mentioning. But Will, I want to just bring you in real quick here and wonder if you had anything else to add on the Hunter Biden saga. I know that, pretty early on, me and you did a show on it, but we're very careful because at the time, this was just a story of emails coming out from the New York Post through Giuliani and Steve Bannon. And, we didn't want to do what CNN does every time they get a Russia conspiracy story, which is dive in 1,000% and make it look like that, for certain that Joe Biden is, wrapped up in something when it could not have been true. So, Will, anything on Hunter?
Yeah, this is something I kind of wanted to put to Joanne, just to get her read on, because right at first, right after that first New York Post story came out, I was like very suspicious. I was like, this some of it looked kind of fishy to me. Like I listened to the Daily Beast publish an hour of interview audio with that the computer repair shop owner, and after I listened to that, I was just like, I don't know about this man. This guy does not like. This sounds weird. He doesn't sound like someone who's in the position he claims to be in. Like he doesn't seem to have the knowledge, or his explanations just came off as odd to me. But all of that was very much just like a surface level impression. And I wonder if you got any other like any kind of suspicion, or like any you saw this as fishy at all. I think it's possible that like the documents themselves, maybe they are legit and authentic, but that maybe the origin of this stuff is like maybe what we're hearing from Giuliani or the repair shop owner. Maybe that stuff is like not quite on the up and up. I'm just curious if you got like what was your impression of that?
Well, at first I was skeptical too, because of course I'm always skeptical. But
Right.
then this guy, Larry Johnson, who I'm not a big fan of to begin with, but he came out and vouched for. When I heard this part, I started to take it more seriously. And that is that the guy, he owns a little computer shop in Wilmington, Delaware. I'm familiar with the area. His father is a retired Air Force colonel, and his father was involved in his father's the one who I believe took the laptop to the FBI in Albuquerque, New Mexico.
Okay.
And so the son had sort of conferred with his father about, what to do about this. Once he realized that he was sitting on something very explosive. Um, I still think that there could be someone else involved in it, but I found it to be more credible when I heard that part of the story. But it still is weird because what was Hunter Biden? First of all, I was thinking, does Hunter Biden personally take his equipment to computer stores? Like I figured he would have
Right.
someone to do that kind of thing for him. Um, and then that he could just forget it. But there was water damage involved. It seems like, I mean, they've got a signature, that they've got a receipt, and there were
Yeah.
3 laptops, and he did pick up 2 of them. It's only one of them that left. My understanding is only one of them where I think the machine was damaged and only the hard drive could be salvaged. And supposedly there are records of him sending letters to Hunter Biden, but you know, this was happening. I think it's April 12th in 2019, and I knew that Joe Biden had kicked off his campaign in Philadelphia. I remember that day very well in late April. So this is like he knew his father was running. There was already the Biden campaign had already started to leak things. I think like in March that he was going to run. So for him to be that reckless, that raised a lot of questions for me. And the other is, um, I'm just surprised that Biden has a lot of very influential, strong political people around him with lots of experience in government, and apparently he's got a lot of money backing him. Like why he didn't have private security with Hunter Biden all the time, and doing things like taking care of laptops that have problems and just keeping him, just making sure he doesn't do anything reckless like that. I was very surprised at that too.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
No, those are all I think concerns that we've definitely thought about, and some of them talked about on the show, which is just that I mean it seems like it really could be a setup of some kind, but I think for a lot of people the biggest mention, and I see everybody saying this and still no response from the Biden campaign, is the lack of anybody coming out and condemning any of these emails. Um, because I suppose it's even possible that this isn't Hunter Biden's laptop, that somebody dropped it off, but somehow got access to his email account. And, they could have even stuck fake emails in there, I suppose. Right. But I haven't seen any denial of any of these emails. And then I know I guess, typical Julie or Breitbart, and so I'm guessing like Steve Bannon and Giuliani political tactics here will be to kind of slow drip some of the information, over the
Right.
next week or so. Although I'm guessing that has to be extremely less effective with all this early voting and stuff. Like you're gonna have a lot of people making their mind a decision to vote before all this comes out. But I do expect that the next week will be very interesting. I'm guessing that if the Biden team has anything to drop on Trump, they will, to try to steal the spotlight away from this in some minutes. But it does at least sound like, listening to the reports, that there may be more here. Although I'm not sure any of it is going to have anything directly tied to Russiagate. Um, Joanne,
There's a
go ahead.
couple other things we should bring up with that is I don't think they can deny them because there are direct witnesses now, people who were on those emails coming out and saying, yeah, these are real. Here's my copy.
Right.
They've got this guy, Bobulinski, who apparently a business deal between Hunter Biden and a Chinese oil company. They had plans, and the Chinese oil company was going to provide funding, and it looks like he got screwed, this Bobulinski guy, in the business deal. So, like, he wasn't happy. There's also this guy, Bevan Cooney, not Devin Archer, Bevan Cooney, who is in jail, and he apparently flipped, and he can also corroborate some of the witnesses. And there's also something about a Kazakh charity that I don't know the details on that one. So, I don't think they can deny them. So they are just taking the Biden just denies everything. He denies that he ever got any money from any foreign entity, which that sentence might be technically true. Although if his son was paying all his bills for that, I don't know. I don't know how that holds up legally. But yeah, so they seem to be fenced in here. I don't think they can deny them, and that's why they haven't. So he's like denying but not denying. And the funny thing is that the FBI, who has had this laptop for a year, there's involvement from a U.S. attorney in Wilmington, Delaware, and the FBI, and there are a lot of people saying, "Hey, why did you do something about this?" And so after all this stuff came out, the FBI did kick off an investigation, but the investigation is whether this was Russian disinformation, not like what happened with Hunter. So, there's some issue with Christopher Wray. I don't. They have one hell of a cover up machine, I tell you.
I mean, that's what the FBI does, right? Will, any more on these emails?
No, I think we kind of hit it. Like, just my overall take is I'm not like it does seem like this has a potential to be explosive, but I'm not so sure if like the way that they did this strategically and the way that Trump has went about trying to sell this stuff, I'm not sure if that's going to have the maximum effect, like electorally, especially with all this mail-in and absentee stuff going on. It might not have quite the effect that they're looking for it to have.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, and especially with at the debate, rather than Trump taking like a minute or two to just lay out this whole thing, he just goes, "You're the big guy, Joe. You're the big guy," and has like this grin on his
Right.
face. And
Like we
any
know what that means, but
right, and anybody who reads Breitbart, or probably even Red State, maybe even anybody who listens to Ben Shapiro and Sean Hannity, will have that. But those people are likely already going Trump. I don't know if anybody who isn't kind of involved in right wing media is gonna get the reference. In that case, Trump just looks kind of weird. Like Biden
I'm a
after he
big guy.
called Trump Abraham Lincoln. Uh, Will,
But you know what
let's
I do think might have been slightly effective is when Ted Cruz and Lindsey Graham did an
Eh,
interview that
go ahead.
I think it was the same day that Twitter and Facebook shut down any links to the New York Post story because it was still kind of contained at that point. Um, they came out with some really strong statements, and they accused social media companies of meddling in the election themselves. That that seemed more effective to me than like the rest of it.
Yeah, that is definitely a more like I don't know cogent take or powerful take that is focusing on the social media companies. I think that's been a more I don't know they've leveraged that argument a lot more effectively than the Biden thing itself or the Hunter thing itself.
Yeah, I didn't think Trump was particularly well prepared for either debate. I think he defeated himself in the first one. I think he probably if you have to pick a winner, he probably won this debate. But it's frustrating when for on either side, when you sort of know some facts about the other candidate, and in this case, like all the things that Trump could have done, could have said uh, in the debate, and he didn't. I think, like Will touched on it, he just wasn't very effective. And to me, he's running around doing these rallies to prove that he's well and to, you know, make sure he hits all the swing states, and I think he has spent. It's clear that he spent a lot more time on that than he does preparing for a debate.
Yeah, I mean that's a good point. It didn't seem like Trump was super well rehearsed, and Biden did definitely have some rehearsed lines and stuff in there. But before we continue with the episode, let's just take a quick second to thank our sponsor, Paloma Verde. Will, tell our audience about the great CBD products that Paloma Verde is selling.
Yeah, so our friends at Paloma Verde were so kind to let us try a bunch of their CBD goodies, and I've been really liking these. They have a bunch of stuff for all kinds of different circumstances. They've got, liquid extracts like oil extracts that packs the heavier dose, which I'm often looking for. They've got fruit chews, though. They have creams and salves that you can use for, sore joints and inflammation. They have soft gels that are just, they come in all kinds of different formulations. There's one with curcumin for inflammation. There's one with melatonin. That's the one that I particularly like for, winding down and getting to sleep at night. They even have stuff for your pets. So they've got a real variety of stuff there. If that sounds down your alley, or if you're just interested in learning what CBD is and what it can do, visit palomaverdestore.com. That's PALOMAVERDE store.com, and use the promo code PEACE to get 25% off your orders of $75 or more.
All right, well, thanks. Let's get back to the show.
All right.
So, Joanne, I one of the places that I was thinking to pick up was with another debate topic that you were mentioning to me before the show that you had heard some interesting updates recently on, and that was COVID. And I think it's hard to say that Joe Biden actually lost like the argument at the debate with Trump on COVID, because Trump was just saying things that really didn't seem to go together and wasn't making, I don't think, a coherent argument. But Joe Biden was pushing lockdowns and more masks and mandates and all this kind of stuff. And knowing that he's still not going to be taking office if he gets elected for 3 or 4 more months here, I thought that maybe that was a really bad argument, as not from necessarily a right or wrong standpoint, but just from what the American people want. I don't think they want more lockdowns. I don't think they want to close back down the schools. And so you're telling me some recent new emissions from the WHO and other scientists who have been making some just interesting points on COVID. And I was hoping you get into that a little bit.
Yeah, I listened to a podcast segment where they had collected some quotes, and a doctor from the WHO, and I don't have his name in front of me, I apologize for that. He came out with a strong statement telling world leaders to stop using lockdowns as their first defense against COVID. He talked about the doubling of world poverty during this period of time during the lockdowns, and I think malnutrition with children, and then there's also been this guy Scott Atlas, who apparently is the head of the task force, Trump's task force, which you wouldn't have known from the, those hour-long briefings they used to do every day. Or maybe he has since become the head of it. I don't know. But he came out with some really strong statements, too, about lockdowns and the damage it's doing. And I always knew just from, people around me and in my own life, the effects that it's having, because I live in what's technically a hotspot state, or it was anyway. It's really creating real hardship, and it doesn't seem to be justified. So this guy Scott Atlas was pushing back. 2 times I saw him push back. First, he pushed back on Fauci, who's always pulled out by the media as some kind of god on all issues of health. The science has become almost a religion. And Scott Atlas said, hey, look, Fauci's just one person on this task force. He's just one person. He doesn't call the shots. And he also denounced the lockdowns, bringing back lockdowns, and talked about a number of different negative impacts like suicides, drug addiction, deaths, depression. And I have heard some numbers. I don't have any in front of me, but I've heard some sort of startling numbers about the impact on everybody else, with the lockdown. And it's been 6 months now. So this is not to mention just the economic catastrophe that it has been. And I get the sense that, well, I mean, Trump, from the way he talks, he's always talking about opening things up again. Like, I think he was always reluctant with the lockdowns. I think he went out because he was told, I think he went along with it because he was told, if you don't do this, 2.2 million people are going to die. And that's the infamous modeling that was done early on that turned out to be just really, really wrong.
Is that the
really
Imperial
inflated.
College model, the original one? Or am I mixing that up?
I think it was a university modeling was it Utah? Oh, I apologize for not having that
My
fact in
bad.
front of me.
No, it was my bad. I brought it up.
Yeah. Yeah, but I think you probably remember in the early periods of time the modeling that was happening, estimated deaths, and they were talking about 2.2 million people were going to die.
Yeah.
And that terrified him. But now he just talks about the effect on the economy, the effect on people. He's been talking about the suicides and drug addiction and just the despair and economic hardship, which is kind of an understatement on so many people, and how that has to take a priority. So I was surprised that the heads of these organizations were coming out with these strong statements. It was such a shift. I mean, I even thought, what's going on here? Are they? And I should also mention that during the debate, Biden made some doom and really doomy type statements. Like he used the term dark winter,
Yeah.
used it twice, and then he emphasized it. And like that term means something to people who know about some of the simulations and the exercises that have been done, not just pre-COVID, but also like around the 9/11 time period. So, and how do they know? Like, just like I always bring this up at the very beginning, maybe like the first week when COVID it was clear that it was going to affect the United States. People like Bill Kristol were out there saying, there's going to be a new normal. Things will never go back. Your life is permanently changed and things will never be the same again. And I thought, how do you know that? We're just like, everybody's also saying, we don't know enough. We don't know enough. But this guy knows that the world is going to change permanently and, we're going to have a new normal. So I'm very, very uncomfortable with a lot of things about this whole pandemic.
Definitely. Will, I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on the debate. Joe Biden did like put together numbers into coherent statements. I mean, he claimed that another 200,000 Americans are going to die by the end of the year. I'm not sure why anybody's going to believe that, the same number of people that have died over the past 6 months are going to die in the next two, but that's what he's saying. And at least he did have some kind of numbers, where Trump was kind of just rambling on and has this kind of halfway position anyways, which is, I kind of like the lockdowns, but I kind of don't. Like, I did a good job by locking down, but I don't support them. And there's just nothing coherent there, or, like having, like, I think the UN is publicly estimating that 10,000 extra kids a month are starving to death in the world because of the, what they call the economic effects of the pandemic, which means the lockdowns. And so I don't know why Trump doesn't use a number like that. But Joe Biden, on the other hand, was, as Joanne said, very doom and gloom.
Yeah, the economic effects of the pandemic. They make it sound like some bank got infected or something. Like no, that's the government, the effects of the government policies in response to the pandemic. That's what. But I mean, in terms of the debate and like the discourse around the virus and stuff, I can see why Joe Biden thinks like it's a very useful talking point to blame every single outcome under the pandemic on Trump. Like that's a great way. I don't know. I can see why he wants to do that, but it doesn't really come out. I don't think it's all that effective. I mean, if you really if you think about it, and maybe for the debate audience it's effective, but if we can kind of look into it a little deeper, I mean, obviously it's more local authorities that have the responsibility of responding to the pandemic. It's like mayors and governors, and they're the ones who are really like in terms of the lockdowns and stuff. We didn't have a nationwide lockdown. That was all like locally imposed as far as I understand. But I mean, like when Biden tries to attack Trump on that stuff, it's like his solutions, like he can say mask mandate, but most of the stuff that he suggests like sounds like stuff that they're already doing. So like that stuff I don't
Yeah.
think comes off as all that like persuasive. Oh, we're going to develop a vaccine. It's like, well, isn't that what they're already doing? Vaccine and therapeutics, and encourage people to wear masks and expand testing. Like that's kind of all stuff that they're already doing. And I guess Biden can personally take on Trump and say, oh, he's not personally worn masks enough or something. But I don't think that's all that effective. In terms of Trump's response, I agree with you, Kyle, that like he also doesn't have much of a coherent argument here. Like I don't think he's done that good at like defending against the allegation that, oh, he's responsible for every single death. Like I think he could have easily like, I don't know. I guess it might sound like he's trying to pass the buck off or something, but he could kind of get into how like this is what we're talking about. Usually are like city and state administrations that are responding here. So I don't know. Like I think he could have mitigated some of that stuff. In terms of his like response to the lockdowns, I think Trump has been like more and more getting especially with like the Scott Atlas guy. As far as I understand, he was brought on a little later, like after that initial wave of briefings that we were seeing with the task force. But it seems like Trump is more and more like he's becoming more and more radical against like any idea of lockdowns. Like he's understanding some of the more some of the impacts of those. Like we've seen that in the first world, really taking a toll, but also in like the third world too, like serious impacts on populations who are living hand to mouth. That like you cannot do that to people. And so like I think he is sort of coming around on that and becoming more vocal about it. Fortunately, but if he loses the election here, I'm not sure how that's not going to be very useful anymore.
In the long list of topics that I thought Joe Biden could have really beat Trump over the head with if he wanted to, could have been the sanctions regimes amid the pandemic. And this would have been like a place where Joe Biden could have like been like, look how inhumane Trump is. Iraq, Venezuela, Iran, North Korea, Syria. But none of that. We also didn't hear Joe Biden mention that about a month into or I guess probably 3 months into Donald Trump's presidency, he was duped by fake allegations of a chemical weapons attack by the Syrian government into bombing airfields and other areas of Syria. I think unintentionally, quote unquote, hitting some civilian targets by, again, a fake chemical weapons allegation, and then doing it again a year later. And that doesn't come up at all, but Joanne's been covering it on her show, and she recently did a fantastic interview with Aaron Bonte. Everybody should check that out. I'll link to it in the show notes page. But Joanne, can you talk a little bit about what's going on with the OPCW and some of the things that Aaron brought up about the, I guess, internal issues with the OPCW and why it's so important to U.S. foreign policy, and the fact that Donald Trump again bombed Syria with no good reason.
Yeah, I'll try to boil this down, but Aaron also has all kinds of material on this over at the Gray Zone and on his show Pushback. But there were materials leaked. The OPCW was pressured to, even though the OPCW is not supposed to figure out who was behind anything, they're just supposed to do an investigation of a site of an alleged chemical weapons attack and provide the details and so on. But they were certainly used as a tool to justify yet another, just going back from the beginning of Syria, over and over and over again, reports of chemical weapons attacks blamed on the Assad government have been like a staple of justification for our involvement, because we have no other legal, really still don't have any legal justification for being in Syria. Um, that they tried that in 2013 and it failed, both in the British Parliament and here. There was just enough pushback that Obama decided not to launch a large military intervention, and instead there was an agreement to bring in the experts to actually end Syria's chemical weapons program and remove all the chemical weapons that they could, which I think is almost all of them. There may have been some left from the opposition controlled areas, but it was a major success and all of that. So after that, it became more difficult to blame these chemical weapons attacks on Assad, but they still did. And they tried to use the OPCW to, create a report, and they put serious pressure on them. Now, we find out later, and of course there were supposedly retaliatory missile attacks, like you mentioned. But later on, some of the scientists and engineers inside the OPCW, they didn't come out publicly to the media, but they did launch an internal pushback on this. And when that didn't work, they leaked. There were some, we don't know exactly who leaked, but some actual reports from the OPCW on the Duma alleged chemical weapons attack were put out into the public through the gray zone. So what we found out, they were frustrated because the final report, the OPCW, they actually manipulated it and ignored their actual on the ground report. So that's the kind of thing that Aaron has been working on. And as part of it, one thing I thought that was particularly interesting was Jose Bustani, who was the first director of OPCW all the way back in the early 2000s. At this point in time, the push was to say that Saddam Hussein had chemical weapons, and he was pressured to go along with that while he was really trying to bring Iraq into the, what is it called, the Chemical Weapons Convention or whatever. So he wasn't going to do it. John Bolton threatened Jose Bustani. He said, I know where your children live. And, essentially, I mean, that's quite a threat, right? Bustani did not budge. Then we tried to, and Aaron explains all this in detail because he also has an interview with Jose Bustani. Apparently it's not Jose, it's Jose. So he explained what happened back in, I think it was 2002, lead up to the Iraq War. So then John Bolton, threatened him. That didn't work. Then they went to the executive council of the OPCW to try to vote him out, even though he had just been renewed. He'd just been put back into that position for some period of years. That didn't work. The OPCW Executive Council, I guess they voted, and they voted to keep him in. So, of course, that still was not going to deter John Bolton and whoever he was who he was fronting for. So then they went to the full, sort of like the UN General Assembly. The OPCW has like a General Assembly of all member states.
Right.
And they got another vote, and they voted Bustani out, although some countries abstained. So there were, how do I put this in the numbers? So if you counted up the no's and the abstains, there were more of those votes than there were yes votes. But because the abstains, are neutral, there still were more yeses than no's, and so he had to step down. And he revealed to Aaron that they had also, John Bolton and the United States had also threatened to withdraw all their funding, which was something like 40% of their total budget. So it would have just totally crippled the organization. And Bustani admits that even if he had won that vote, he still would have resigned because, this organization, there were so many important programs, and, he just couldn't do that to the organization. So he's not been at OPCW since back then, but some of the inspectors who worked on the chemical weapons attacks in Syria did work with Bustani back then. They sort of were at OPCW, and then they came back because their expertise. So there's a variety. There's not, and they're supposed to remain anonymous too, which is another thing. Some people were exposed. So Bustani stepped up to support the whistleblowers inside the OPCW who were showing what their actual report was from the Duma attack, which did not support that it was a chemical weapons attack at all, nor that it was done by the Syrian government. So he came forward with that, and most recently, there was the UN Security Council is involved in this now. I believe Russia and China are pushing back on the whole blame of chemical weapons attacks on the Syrian government, and they had a council meeting, 2 different meetings, and they brought an inspector, they brought Jose Bustani, and they brought Aramate too to testify.
Yeah.
Well, the UN Security Council blocked Bustani's testimony altogether. He individually, I guess he recorded his statement and put it out by himself anyway. The mainstream media has almost completely ignored this. And Ian Henderson was also there. And I think Theodore Postal was it was done virtually, it was on a Zoom call. And basically they shut down. They did the same thing, Kyle and Will. They said that they were just Russian disinformation artists. So this is like the one size fits all. If they can't argue the facts, they just go straight to the Russian disinformation story. And these guys are, they are not Russian disinformation artists. In fact, Theodore Postal was on the call and he objected. He's like, hey, this is an MIT professor, right? Yeah. He's like, hey, I'm an American citizen. This isn't Russian disinfo. They pushed back on it. But since they were on a Zoom call, they just cut him off. And the American ambassador came out and said, clearly this is a stunt and this is Russian disinformation. They just shut the whole thing down. In fact, they shut off. One of the guys stepped in. He's like, are you going to shut off that mic? And so they shut off Postal's mic. It was really a disgrace. And Aaron was there also in support of the information that the inspectors had released to show that what their real investigation results were. And he did a fantastic job. I don't know what the longer term impact's going to be. And clearly this is another thing that the mainstream media, corporate media, state propaganda organ is just hoping that if we ignore it, no one will know about it. The overriding narrative that has been blasted across the media for, I don't know, like 8 years now is that, Assad is a murderous dictator who attacks his own people with chemical weapons. That's been sort of drummed into the public space for so long that I'm not quite sure that these factual, really brave whistleblowers, I think they took great risk to expose this information. I'm not sure what the impact's going to have, but I personally was very glad to see that there are, because I do trust the science. I've spent my whole life in science and tech and engineering. So I'm really glad. I generally have faith, though I've lost a lot of it, in people who work in these fields. So I really was glad to see that these people, weren't going to stand for this, and they got the information about the real investigation out as best they could. But overall, I'm not quite sure how much impact it's going to have. And it was just really disgrace, the whole thing, especially the way these people were treated at the UN Security Council.
Isn't that just a perfect 2020 snapshot there? They're being accused of Russian agents for disputing Syrian chemical weapons attacks, and then they can cut them off during their testimony because they're doing it over Zoom because of the pandemic. So it's just all coming together perfectly.
This pandemic has been very convenient for a lot of things.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's kind of why I was thinking maybe to wrap it up. to just kind of go back and realize that they're using the Russia narrative here, which is why the three of us have spent so much time on it. It's not because I want Hunter Biden's emails to expose Joe Biden so he loses the election to Donald Trump. I don't really want Trump to win the election at all. However, if we don't defeat this Russia narrative, if we don't establish the truth and have people understand that no, Trump isn't a puppet of Vladimir Putin. Putin didn't raid the 2016 election against Hillary Clinton. That it wasn't compromise or whatever other fake scandal that they've come up with, the dozens and dozens of them that we've now debunked on this show. Then they're going to use that narrative every time that there's something they don't want to hear. And I mean, this goes to a Republican senator from Kentucky. Rand Paul is apparently a Russian agent because he doesn't want Montenegro in NATO. That's how far they'll take this. They'll take this and accuse American citizens of being Russian agents at the UN Security Council. I mean, this shows no bounds, and that's why the narrative has to be defeated. And if it costs Joe Biden the election, stupid Democrats, it's their own fault for picking a fake narrative that's going to destroy the INF Treaty, the Open Skies Treaty, and probably the New START Treaty, and get rid of all of our nuclear weapons agreements, and just give the perfect excuse to continue all these endless wars and interventions and everything. So, I don't know, Will, maybe you first, and then Joanne. Any way you want to take that, then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I mean, you said it, man. Like that is like this has been like I don't know. It sounds like we might have an axe to grind or something. It's kind of because we do. Like this really is. It is important. Like this, the Russiagate narrative. Not only because it could potentially compromise diplomacy between the two largest nuclear arsenals on planet Earth. For me, that's ultimately always the ultimate concern. But it's a gigantic octopus. It has its tentacles everywhere. You can see the evidence of this narrative being used to fight on behalf of the empire in every realm, like from the Senate to the UN Security Council. So it really is, I think, important to challenge that.
Yeah, and I think that early on we sensed that this was bad for a lot of reasons. The smaller reasons, what it was being used for to begin with, but we always sensed that this was going to cause much bigger problems, and we can see it. It's the zombie lie that never goes away, and it's used to cover up things that really scare me. Massive corruption, massive abuse of power by the state apparatus, possibly the wrecking of our elections, and it won't die. And I think that it has now become a one size fits all for everything bad that is done. And when I say bad, I mean really bad. They just pull out this excuse, and I don't have any sense of how many people really believe it or not, but I would think that they're going to start to question things, but I don't know. But it is, and I think and we should just also mention that last debate, it was supposed to be a foreign policy debate, and they just scratched that agenda. They hardly talked about foreign policy at all, which is a thing that we tend to be, we think it's at the root of a lot of things, like our top issue. So there's that, anyway, it keeps me up at night. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, well, I mean, we could go on a lot longer. We didn't even get to Joe Biden calling Kim Jong-un a thug over and over again. I mean, that was pretty entertaining, but we'll wrap there. Joanne, thank you so much for coming back on the show. You're doing this really cool thing now. Well, I think it's cool as a content creator, where in addition to the interviews you do with your guests, you also have them stay around and answer a bonus question. A lot of the bonus
Cool.
questions lately have been surrounding the deep state and who's a part of it and who's pushing the certain angles that you're talking about. So really, really cool stuff. I've been fortunate enough that you've shared some of those with me, just because we support each other's work, but definitely everyone think about not only subscribing to Joanne's show, but especially after you listen to a couple of interviews and you look at the kind of work that Joanne's doing, it's really important to the movement. Like in the days after the massive explosion in the port of Beirut, Joanne had on Elijah Manier to bring like a sense and reasonable discussion to it. It wasn't hysterics around Hezbollah or France or whoever else,
Israel.
Israel, but rather a very just detailed conversation about what it's like in Lebanon, because Elijah Manier knows the Middle East, he knows war reporting, he knows Lebanon. You've had Aaron Mate on recently a couple times. You covered the Assange stuff. I would have loved to talk to you about that today, but everybody really, if you're still listening, take the time now, go and subscribe to Joanne's show. And anywhere else to send people, Joanne?
No, I think you'll find it. You can, on your mobile podcast apps, or just go to the website if you have any question about where to find it. And thanks so much, Kyle, for the support. I really do appreciate it. I love you guys in this show, and I hope we keep working together.
Thanks, Joanne.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I agree. Feeling is mutual.